I call this joint meeting of the Committee on Public Safety, Finance, and Policy and the Committee on Children and Families, Finance, and Policy to order. There are so many of you here. Hello. Members, since we will not be taking any official action on the bills until after the joint hearing, we don't need a quorum, although it looks like we probably have one. I do want to welcome everyone to this joint hearing between our two committees today. We'll be discussing the important topic of gun violence and the impact on our children. The plan today is to spend the first hour as a joint meeting where we will hear a presentation and maybe watch a short video. We're having some technical problems, so hopefully we can get that resolved. Then we'll hear testimony on House File 4300. After we've taken testimony on the bill, we'll gavel out of the joint hearing. Also, just note there's a lot of written materials and written testimony in your packets. The Public Safety Committee will then gavel back in and take action on the two bills for the remainder of the time. Before we begin, just a note for everybody here. Everyone here today must be seated when they are in the hearing room. There's no standing or sitting in the walkways or aisles. If you need further accommodation, please let staff know. Signs are not permitted in the hearing room or at the testifier's table, so signs should be left outside. Clapping and other disruptions are not allowed. We'll also be discussing sensitive topics today, so if anybody needs to take a break, including members of the committee, please feel free to step outside. Don't hesitate to do so. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Chair Pitt.
Thank you, Chair Moeller, and thanks members of the public for joining us today at this really important hearing. The impetus for this hearing was information that firearms are now the leading cause of death for American children. Those of us in the Children and Families Committee, of course, are focused on making sure that kids in our state are healthy and thriving, and there is a big problem there. Gun deaths of kids spiked significantly in over 10 years, while child deaths from car crashes actually fell by nearly half. So we know that there's a problem here, and we want to address it and do so jointly with our colleagues in the Public Safety Committee. We're lucky to be joined by a couple of researchers who've looked into this issue, as Chair Moeller referenced. We have a video we hope to play and a conversation, and then move on to having a bill presentation about a proposal to address at least part of the issue here. And then I do want to note just logistically that the members of the Children and Families Committee will then, the joint hearing will then adjourn, and the members of the Children and Families Committee will step back, and then the two bills today are in the possession of the Public Safety Committee, and so it's that committee, of course, that will take action and have further discussion and votes on the bills. So with that, we're going to proceed with our agenda by first receiving the presentation and members' packets. There's a presentation. It should be posted online, members of the public as well. I believe that we're joined by Dr. Rebecca Mannix and Cordelia Mannix. I'm hoping that that is the case, that they're both on with us. And again, there's a presentation that is in our packets.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen if that works. So just let me know if this technology is actually happening. Can you see my screen?
It does, yeah. We can see Ken.
We've got. You might want to turn up the full presentation view. I'm going to ask Representative Lesnikar. I might ask if we could move you maybe to one of the inside seats, or just thinking in terms of folks being able to see. We only have one view. We're just adjusting in the room for a moment, Dr. Mannix, because of the kind of the physical setup here. So give us just a moment. And then, so Dr. Mannix, we can see your presentation, and I'd ask you to start by identifying yourself. We're so glad to have you joining us, and then please proceed with your testimony.
Absolutely. So my name is Rebecca Mannix. I have a degree in medicine and a degree in quantitative methods in public health. I'll be presenting today with my daughter, Cordelia Mannix, and this is a joint project we did that was published in Pediatrics in the fall of 2023.
Please proceed.
I just want to acknowledge and thank you for inviting us to present our work today. It was a very meaningful study for both of us, and so we're grateful for the opportunity to present it. Just as way of background, I already introduced myself, but I am a pediatric emergency medicine physician at Boston Children's Hospital, and I am an injury researcher at Harvard Medical School. And my daughter Cordelia is a high school student who was on a research elective with her mother, which is probably the most painful elective a child can do, but nonetheless, we thrived.
Fair enough.
So in terms of
Glad you have her with us, and the children and families appreciate the parent-child partnership here. So yeah, please.
Thank you. Just in terms of disclosures and conflicts of interest, as an academic provider, I'm required to disclose these. My work has been funded previously by the Department of Defense, the National Institutes of Health, the National Football League Charitable Foundation, Abbott Laboratories, and Boston Children's Hospital. None of these entities provided any funding for the current study. And so in terms of today's testimony, I'm just going to give a brief overview of the epidemiologic trends in pediatric injury-related deaths and a brief comparison to other trends in pediatric deaths, just to give you a sort of global sense of where we are in pediatric health. My data sources are important to acknowledge. So these data are obtained from 2 online data sources that are basically offered by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. That means they're publicly accessible to anyone who actually wants to query these data sources. One is called Whiskers, which is a web-based injury statistics query and reporting system, and the other is the CDC Wonder. And these are basically derived from the National Vital Statistics estimates of deaths based on death certificates. So these are all the overall trends in fatal and non-fatal pediatric injuries. Note that on the y-axis, we have injury rate per 100,000 population of children, and the x-axis is years. And what you can see on the top with non-fatal injuries is that non-fatal injuries have consistently been decreasing over the last decade, with a 54% decrease in non-fatal injuries. In contrast, in the last decade, there's been a 23% increase in fatal injuries in children. And if you sort of break out the subcategories of which fatal injuries have increased the most, firearm fatalities have increased by 87% in the past 10 years, and drug poisoning fatalities increased by 133%. So these have been obviously all over the media. These are not new data, but still alarming. One thing we did that was, I think, important in this paper is we actually looked at case fatality rate trends. Case fatality rates basically take all injuries as the denominator and then look at the percentage of fatal injuries amongst all injuries. And what you can see on the y-axis again is the percent case fatality rate, and the x-axis again is years. And what you see is a marked increase in the case fatality rate in pediatric injuries. It's more than doubled, and that means all injuries are becoming increasingly fatal over time. Breaking it out by mechanism, you can see in the panel on the right that the percent fatality rate is broken out by various mechanisms. And you can see it's an interrupted access just for ease of presentation. But it's notable to see that firearm injuries are the most fatal injuries. So the case fatality rate for firearm injuries in children is upwards of 15, compared to falls, which is, vanishingly low. So firearm injuries are the most fatal injuries in pediatric injury research. I just wanted to break out by sort of intent the rates of fatalities and the increases based on intent. And so these databases usually break up intents by unintentional injuries, suicide, and violence-related injuries. And you can see the dark columns are in 2012, and the lighter columns are 2021. And across all intents, you can see a marked increase. There's been an 83% increase in unintentional firearm deaths. There's been a 70% increase in suicide-related deaths and an 85% increase in violence-related deaths. So by all intents, we've seen a marked increase in firearm-related fatalities in children. And finally, just for a comparison of other trends in pediatric fatalities, I'm an ER physician, so obviously I see all these different ways that kids unfortunately get sick and injured. But what I have seen is incredible progress across other mechanisms. It's hard to tell on this scale, but I just broke out some of the most common mechanisms of death that we see in children in the ER and overall in our country. And what you can see, again, the x-axis is time, and this time it's a longer period of time for the past 20 years. The y-axis, once again, is rates per 100,000 population. And so even with COVID, the rates of respiratory diseases, deaths from respiratory diseases in the last 20 years has decreased. Cancer deaths notably have decreased significantly in the last 20 years. And again, the scale makes it look a little less impressive than it's been, but we have really moved the needle. And perhaps the most striking is the change in motor vehicle fatalities in children. So when you start off in 2001, you can see we had pretty high rates, and we really have gotten ourselves less than half the rates of fatalities in children from motor vehicle traffic deaths. Really impressive. You can see it's climbing up a little bit in the last few years, so a trend to watch. And then looking at firearm-related fatalities in children. These are the red squares. You can see a marked increase in the last few years. And this actually also depicts that for the first time in sort of the history of injury-related epidemiology in children, we see that firearm fatalities are now the #1 cause of death in children. So to summarize, case fatality rates from pediatric firearm injuries are high, the highest mechanism of injury of all. And in contrast to most other trends in pediatric fatalities, pediatric firearm fatalities have increased dramatically in the last 1 to 2 decades. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mannix, for your testimony and for your work, and many thanks to Cordelia Mannix as well. We have a video that we were hoping to play. I don't know if we have a sense from staff as to whether we're going to be able to do that. Maybe as we're figuring that out, I'll see if there are clarifying questions for Dr. Mannix the folks have. We will also have time to discuss the presentation a little bit further as well. So we're going to see what we can do if we can get the video to work. I also want to note for members and members of the public that there's a couple of articles in the packet as well. One entitled "How to Stop Toddler-Involved Shootings" that has showing about the rate of unintentional shootings by children per population, and other things, and just talking about juvenile deaths by gunshot increase. So a number of useful pieces in the packet. Looks like we may have the video up, and so we'll watch that. Maybe not. Okay. It's 15 seconds. So, Dr. Mannix, I don't know if you can hear that, but we were able to hear the first 15 seconds of the 3-minute video. Well, maybe there'll be some miracle. And we also may not be able to hear it. Dr. Mannix, we're working on it a little bit. Ms. McDaniel, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to do that. Representative Katiza-Wittun, Representative Becker-Finn. Representative Becker-Finn,
I was just going to say, are we using Zoom for the testifier?
Well, yeah, so Representative Becker-Finn presumably we are using Zoom for the testifier, so I'm a little bit unclear about but we have the technology somehow to do that, so. I think Representative Katiza-Wittun, you're going to make the same point, I suspect. Representative Katiza-Wittun, different point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering if I could ask a question while we play.
Yeah, so we're going to work on this a little bit, see what we can do, and we'll have Representative Katiza-Wittun ask a question and kind of go from there. Representative Katiza-Wittun.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for this presentation, Ms. Mannix, or Dr. Mannix, rather. So on your summary page, and obviously the statistics throughout the graphs and the presentation, the firearm fatalities have increased dramatically in the last 1 to 2 decades. I'm guessing that, we're going to hear from some other testifiers, but I'm just curious, in terms of the car crashes, motor vehicle accidents going down, is there any legislation that we can point to over the last 20 plus years that really has made that change? And then in contrast, has there been change in legislation that we're seeing these gun deaths go up?
Dr. Mannix.
Thank you for asking that question. I think that, like all public health interventions, the decrease in motor vehicle fatalities comes from multiple sources. So there obviously has been effective legislation related to seatbelt requirements in kids. I actually did a study looking at the effect of legislation on fatalities in motor vehicles on children, showing the efficacy of legislation. It's also safer cars. It's partnering with industry, it's local decision makers, educating children and families. So I think it's multifactorial. It's been lots of little incremental improvements that have led to this amazing change over time. I would say that lesson is probably what we need to take forward for most public health interventions involving children. There is no one magic panacea. It comes from lots of different interventions with lots of different stakeholders taking responsibility for this growing crisis in pediatric firearm fatalities.
Mannix, Representative Khadija-Watoon, follow up?
No, thank you, sir.
Yeah, a great question, though. Other questions or comments at this point? I think we're open for discussion. Yeah, Representative Hudson, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question regarding the statistics is, was there any breakdown, obviously you're seeing an overall increase in firearm deaths. Was there any breakdown in terms of what the circumstances surrounding that increase was, whether it's some sort of impetus that caused a sharp spike in these overall deaths, or a breakdown of the numbers themselves that show us the different types of situations that people are getting into that result in firearm deaths with children?
Dr. Mannix.
Thank you so much for that question. These are obviously large-scale, broad observational data, and so parsing out individual, more granular circumstances are difficult. I tried to do that a little bit with the intent, getting at the sort of differences between unintentional versus violence-related versus suicide. It would be speculative for me to sort of say why I think increases in firearm fatalities have occurred over the last 2 decades. There has been limited research regarding this, and most of the research is observational.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you for that question.
For the comment. Other questions or comments, members? I think we're going to give the video another try, I think, in a moment. Are we thinking we're going to be able to do that? I'll ask staff. You think we can do the video? Okay, we're going to give the video another try. So we're working on it. Always the challenge. Okay. Here we go.
This long challenge here. We've got so we
It on with the sound up where we are. We're going to see if we can. We might ask folks to turn off their.
It's not, maybe inside your child's friends. 16, there were
So unfortunately,
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not.
so if we can turn off the sound, et cetera. Yeah. So so what we're going to do is we're going to put the link to the clip online, both on the committee websites and then also certainly send out to members as well. What it is, it's a 3-minute video clip talking about an experiment, and I think this has been done in a number of places, of having kids who have been trained in how to, in being safe around firearms, but showing kids finding what is in the experiment, of course, a firearm that's been rendered safe, and kids who've been taught to report it, not to touch it, et cetera, and yet very much attempting to do so, and in fact doing so in a number of cases, pointing at themselves, pointing at other kids. This is a video from the Care 11 TV station here in the Twin Cities from 2018, I believe. And so again, we will post the link to that so that folks can see that as part of the conversation. So looking to see if there are other questions, comments. Representative Chair Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Chair Pinto. And just so folks get an idea of the video if you haven't seen it before. So essentially they plant handguns in sort of a waiting room situation, and then they have different ages and families, different kids are alone in the waiting room. And there's like a handgun in a purse, there's a handgun like in a box. And what you see, if we could see the video, is that the kids sort of like there aren't any adults in the room, and these are even kids who've been told, like many of our kids, if you find a firearm, you should go tell an adult right away. And what you see in the video is like the kid walks up to the box and opens up the box and like sees the gun and like calls the other kid over and then reaches in and picks up the gun and the handgun and then immediately turns and does this and then does this to the other kid. Immediately does the thing we've all trained our kids not to do. So that's really the takeaway that you get from the video. It's a lot more powerful, obviously, when you're seeing a child do it. But that's the meat of what's in that video, and I do encourage folks to watch it because it is disturbing.
Thank you much, Chair Becker-Finn. Lead Navati.
Question about the data on when you're referring to children and children-related death. What were the age ranges?
Dr. Mannix.
Thank you for asking. The age ranges were actually 0 to 18 years of age, inclusive of 18 years of age.
Pete,
I think she was saying 0 to 18, inclusive of 18-year-olds.
including, so it's under
what I heard.
19.
I think you said under 18. I actually think she's saying including folks who are 18. Yes, Dr. Mannix is confirming that. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the question. Members, other questions or discussion regarding the presentation? We really appreciate Dr. Mannix and Cordelia Mannix, your work, and also you joining us through this a little bit clunky technology, but it worked well to have you join us. Looking to see if there's anything else. I'm not sure if Chair Mueller has anything else she wants to say at this point, but otherwise, I think we're going to then turn to address a proposal to help address some of the things that we've heard. Chair Mueller.
Thank you, Chair Pinto. Next, we're going to move on to a presentation of House File 4300, Chair Becker-Finn's bill. We'll also hear testimony as a joint committee here. As a reminder, the testifiers have been given time limits. Please try your best to adhere to these limits. We do need to be out of here today at noon. And then just so members of the public know, each side has been given 15 minutes for testimony. So our GOP colleagues were given equal amount of time to present their testifiers. And so we'll be keeping track of the time for both us and for the GOP. And go ahead, Chair Becker-Finn, and please tell us about your bill.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Chair Mueller, since we're still in the joint committee, we'll wait to move the A4 amendment until, okay, so I will be speaking to the bill as if it's been amended by the A4 amendment, which is in members' packets.
Sounds good.
Just want to make sure. So as amended, this bill requires that guns be stored safely, thereby keeping guns out of the hands of children and other people who are unauthorized to use them. No single piece of legislation is going to prevent every single gun death, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do more to prevent harm from occurring. The bill defines safe storage as either unloaded with a locking mechanism, like this lock, or in a firearm storage unit. That's legally what we call it, but a gun, essentially a gun safe. And we defined it that way so it include all kinds of gun safes, including biometric safe, not necessarily the big cabinet type that some of us are familiar with. And if you choose to keep it in a storage unit under this bill, you could keep it loaded. If your gun is under your direct control, this bill doesn't apply. If the gun is within your reach, this bill would not apply. The idea is that we want to make sure that guns are being stored safely when you're not using them. The bill provides some exceptions as amended for law enforcement, shooting sports, and then we also wanted to clarify that this wouldn't change anything under statute 97B.045, which is the statute regarding transporting firearms. So however you've been legally transporting your firearms, this wouldn't change that. Now that I have explained what the bill does, I want to clarify what it does not do. This is not the bill that we heard on safe storage last year, despite the confusion and most of the emails I've been receiving that are referring to language and issues that are not in the bill before us. A lot of the emails I've been receiving are referring to a completely different bill and issues that are no longer an issue in House File 4300. We heard from lots of Minnesotans last year about this issue, and we took the feedback and we came up with this different bill. For example, the bill in front of you does not add any requirements regarding the storage of ammunition. So I know that was triggering, for lack of a better word, for a lot of folks. So we removed that provision. And further, if you are someone who likes to sleep with, you feel safer with a loaded gun in your nightstand, you can continue to do that under this bill. Regardless of your zip code, you should be storing your gun safely. Regardless of your zip code, you should be safe from gun violence. I know there are special interests out there who are trying to gin up this rural-urban divide over this issue, but it's really misplaced. As many of you know, I was born and raised in northern Minnesota. I actually won my first gun, a shotgun, in a Ducks Unlimited banquet before I could even walk. My dad used to put my name and my brother's name on all of the raffle tickets he would buy. So I wasn't able to find the picture, but I promise you in my home back up north, there's a picture of me as an infant with a shotgun across my lap because my parents thought that was funny. But that was my first gun. I hunt and shoot clays up north. I hunt both grouse and deer, and I'm teaching my kids to do the same. So I'm not someone that's disconnected from rural life or gun ownership. I still spend a lot of time up north. I'm familiar with the feeling that you might need a firearm for personal safety, and I'm familiar that you might need a firearm to deal with an animal in one way or another. Certainly have family members who live on farms and have dealt with wildlife in that way. This bill isn't about taking away anyone's legally, lawfully acquired guns. We just want you to store them safely when you're not using them. Also, for the record, despite the one-click politics emails you might be receiving, there's no political ulterior motives. No lobbyists asked me to do this. There's no agenda other than I want more people to live. So whether it's a young child that finds a loaded handgun on top of a cabinet, or a teen who knows their uncle keeps a loaded gun in the closet at all times, or a person struggling with ideas of self-harm, I want all those people to still be here. That is the legislative intent. The requirements in this bill are not extreme. They're actually not even as onerous as what the NRA or others will tell you if you take a firearm safety course. The reality is that every time an unauthorized person, whether that's a child or an adult who should not have access, accesses a gun when they shouldn't, an adult somewhere was responsible for the path that gun took from being sold at Cabela's or wherever you buy your firearms to ending up in the hands of somebody who wasn't supposed to have it. Safe storage is overwhelmingly supported by Minnesotans after polling, people who live in all parts of the state, overwhelmingly supported by Minnesotans. And most gun owners know how important it is to store our guns safely. This is a reasonable bill that will prevent death and harm to our communities, and welcome the discussion and would love for you guys to hear from my testifiers.
Thank you, Chair Becker-Finn. And we're going to begin. We have one testifier. I believe you have one testifier who is remote, and we're going to be beginning with that testifier. But just so we can keep things moving in the allotted time, after we hear from Kristen Song, the next testifier will be Jed Schlegelmich. I'm really sorry, I'm mispronouncing. So if you could come down, please, and sit near the testifier table so that we're ready for your testimony after the video plays. All right, and we will go ahead with Kristen Song, and welcome back to the committee. If you can introduce yourself and begin your testimony, please.
Sure, of course. Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. My name is Kristen Song, and I wanted to share with you a few moments of the day my world imploded. I took off running towards the hospital bays where I knew my son would be, but I was stopped by a social worker who grabbed me by the shoulder and led me to a tiny room where no sunlight ever reaches and where no good news is ever delivered. The ER doctor entered the room, slid down the wall, buried his head in his hands, and whispered, "Your son is gone." At that moment, all that I knew, loved, and trusted imploded into a tiny million pieces. I fell to the ground and started rocking in a fetal position, begging to see my son. I wanted to tell him how loved and cherished he was. I wanted to kiss his forehead. I wanted to tuck him in one last time. The ER doctor took his head out of his hands and said, "Please remember your son as he was. He is unrecognizable even to your eyes." You see, my son was shot in the head and missing most of his face. But the ER doctor didn't understand. I was the first person to welcome Ethan into this world, and I wanted to be the last to say goodbye. I never did get to say goodbye. As I walked out of the hospital into the starless night, my beautiful boy was being wheeled to the morgue. It was the first day of my life sentence and the first day of his death sentence. My son was killed with an unsecured gun at his best friend's house. The father stored his 3 handguns and the ammunition in a shoebox. His friend had been showing off his father's unsecured guns for over 6 months. Unsecured guns are responsible for the majority of gun deaths in our children. Suicides, unintentional shootings, and 76% of school shooters use an unsecured gun from home or a relative's home to hunt and kill our innocent children. And the largest source of stolen guns is from private cars and homes. These stolen guns are crime guns, and they're wreaking havoc on our urban communities. I know child access prevention and safe storage laws will have the most dramatic impact on reducing gun deaths in our children and will help create a cultural shift in this country where it becomes second nature to store your weapons if children can gain access. There is truly no greater calling than to save a child, and now I urge Minnesota to please answer that call. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony. We have Judge Schlegelmich up, and then the next testifier will be Hillary Brazel. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and begin.
Yeah, hi, my name's Jed Schlegel-Milch. You were very close. My brother John passed away on October 31st, 1992. He was at a party with some friends. He was visiting them out of town. John had been showing some signs of suspicious behavior at the party that night. The house the party was at belonged to a family of hunters. The parents were out of town. There was drinking going on. But there were also shotguns out and around, out in the open. Shotgun shells out in the open. The party was happening upstairs, and John left to go downstairs where nobody was around. He grabbed one of the shotguns sitting out, he turned it on himself, and he pulled the trigger. John was 17. Just a kid. To this day, obviously, it's been tough for my parents, my sister, and myself. Every time I see my parents, I'm reminded of John and the tragedy and heartbreak that they've had to endure as parents. But they carry on, and they're pretty incredible. 17 years after my brother passed, I decided to make a documentary film about him and the circumstances surrounding his death. During that time, I met with someone also named John, who was with my brother at the party that night that he passed. That party that occurred was actually at his home, his childhood home. We talked about a lot of things. We talked about what happened that night at the party, but we also just talked about fun memories of John. Towards the end of the talk, John mentioned some things that he learned from that night, a silver lining or something. He brought up things like awareness and not turning a blind eye to someone else. One of the last very important points he mentioned was locking up a gun. We need to pass this gun storage bill. If it could prevent just one kid from using a gun on themselves or someone else, then it is worth passing. And I think this would save many lives and much heartache. This is the sensible thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Hillary Brazel and then Stefan Gingrich. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and begin.
My name is Hillary Brazel. Thank you, Chair Moeller, Chair Pinto, and thank you to Representative Becker-Finn for introducing this legislation and connecting me to this very important and personal topic. I'm here to share the tragic story of Michael Brazel, my husband. He was murdered in the front yard of our home at 7:30 on a Saturday morning, May 6th, 2023. Michael noticed a young man breaking into our family car and went out into our front yard to stop them. Michael was shot 3 times at close range in his chest and back by a 17-year-old man who was the lookout for the crime. I awoke that morning to the 3 shots and a loud car driving away from our home. My 14-year-old son had awoken to the loud car yelling in our front yard and witnessed lots of the scene in the front yard of our home. As a pediatric nurse, I was the first responder for Michael and tried to perform life-saving measures while my older son called 911 and my younger son watched the horror play out. Michael was attended to by the St. Paul Fire Department and brought to HCMC, where he was pronounced dead within 30 minutes of the shooting. My sons no longer have their father. I no longer have my husband. And the ripples of his death have torn apart the lives of our family, our close friends, neighbors, and countless community members, as Michael was a dedicated carpenter, artist, and hockey coach. My list of concerns for public safety related to Michael's murder list is long. There was 4 young men in the car, all with previous history with guns and violent crimes, both as juveniles and adults. They all had criminal history and were on probation at the time of the crime. Specifically, the shooter had been just released from probation in April of 2023. The shooter was pulled over on May 2nd, 2023 by police in the South Metro, but nothing came from the traffic stop. These same 4 young men went out car shopping, looking for something to steal the night of Friday, May 5th, through into the early morning of May 6th, 2023. They planned ahead to bring a gun with them while they went car shopping, looking for things to steal, and they had it as protection. And they took turns as lookouts for each other while they were breaking into cars. The gun they used to murder Michael was stolen from a family member of one of the young men, as it was not properly stored by the gun owner. Following Michael's murder, the stolen gun was kept under the driver's seat of one of the men who got away after the crime, meaning that the gun was kept even if it was used to murder someone, presumably if it was needed in future crimes. The St. Paul Police Department was able to retrieve the gun from under the driver's seat through a traffic stop a month after Michael's murder. This helped us have a strong case to convict both young men who killed my husband. Both the men have pled guilty to Michael's murder and are currently serving time, but nothing will ever replace Michael's life that was taken and the life that we had yet to live together. It literally was 57 seconds that took the criminals to drive up to our home, break into my car, interact with my husband, shoot him 3 times, and speed away. But the crime will have a lifetime of consequences, for our lives will never be the same. I urge you to support this legislation because a locked up gun could have prevented the murder of my husband. I believe that proper storage of guns can make this tragedy and something that no one else will have to experience in the future. I've also shared additional documents that are in writing for you all to reference, and I welcome any questions if you have them in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Stefan Gingrich, and then the final testifier before we move to the other side is Maria Sarabia. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, and committee members. My name is Stefan Gingrich. I'm an epidemiologist with the Injury and Violence Prevention Section at the Minnesota Department of Health. I'm here today to provide some statistics related to mortality of firearms in Minnesota. You can go to the next slide there. Oh,
I don't know if I'm supposed to.
it's right here. In 2021, which is the most recent year for which we have complete data, there were 573 firearm deaths in Minnesota. From 2018 to 2021, there were 73% of the firearm deaths in Minnesota were suicide deaths, 23.6% were homicide deaths, and the remaining 3% or so were split between law enforcement intervention, undetermined manner of death, and unintentional deaths. So the majority of the firearm deaths in Minnesota year in and year out are firearm suicide deaths. The third point here, firearm suicide rates are about 1.5 to 2 times higher in rural areas than they are in urban areas in Minnesota. And we'll see a little bit of detail related to what urban and rural mean in a couple slides here, or these will be available for you to review after my testimony. Fourth point, males make up about 90.8% of firearm suicide deaths and 83.4% of firearm homicide deaths, demonstrating the increased rates of firearm deaths among males for both suicide and homicide. And in 2021, there were 393 firearm suicide deaths in Minnesota compared to 53 non-fatal self-harm firearm injuries treated in hospitals, demonstrating the high fatality rate, as Dr. Mannix also referenced earlier in the testimony today. Next slide. This is just a slide showing the firearm mortality rate in Minnesota across the past 20 or so years. You can see an increase towards the last few years, but a slow and steady increase in the years preceding that as well. This is the distribution of firearm deaths by manner. So suicide, again, the leading cause of firearm death in Minnesota, followed by homicide, law enforcement intervention, undetermined and unintentional deaths. The firearm suicide rate here, we're showing firearm suicide and homicide rates by urbanicity. So on the far left, we have the Twin Cities, and as you go across the x-axis towards the far right, it gets less urban and more rural. So the most rural areas in the state have the highest rates of firearm suicide. Rates we use here just to adjust for the fact that there are so many more people in the urban areas relative to the rural areas, so we're adjusting for the size of the population. And finally, males, as I mentioned, have higher rates of firearm mortality or firearm suicide across all ages relative to females. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I'll be happy to take any questions as you have them.
Thanks for your testimony. Then next up, we have Maria Sarabia.
Thank you.
Welcome. Please introduce yourself and begin.
Good morning. My name is Maria Sarabia. I serve as the Assistant Commissioner of the Health Improvement Bureau at the Minnesota Department of Health. Thank you, chairs, committee members, and I'm here to express why the Minnesota Department of Health is a supporter of increased firearm safe storage policies in Minnesota. I first must add that there's no single policy or intervention that will fix any issue that is this complex, and that firearm injuries are multi-layered, and oftentimes we need a comprehensive, multidisciplinary, mixed methods, cross-cutting, or Swiss cheese model approach to address this challenge. Safe storage of firearms is just one prevention intervention to a bigger comprehensive approach. So with this intervention, if it fails with a more comprehensive approach, we would have interventions in places where to increase the likelihood of needing to, again, likelihood of the event not taking place, and particularly not being a fatal event. So as Mr. Gingrich presented, using a firearm in instances of suicide is extremely fatal. Firearms in suicide attempts are lethal 90% of the time, and multiple studies over many decades and life experiences indicated that decisions to attempt suicide are made in under 10 minutes. MDH firmly believes that strategies that limit easy access to firearms in those fewer than 10 minutes consideration time will substantially impact the number of fatal suicide incidents. So through recent tragedies, where we see that it has impacted children, families, communities, and our society, particularly here in Minnesota, we're in current day times needing to address this impact of violence. We have an opportunity to prevent the impacts of firearm violence from existing through policies such as this. Whether the result is in death or incarceration, violence has negative impacts on our communities and for generations. The impacts include, but are not limited to death, physical injury, substantial mental health challenges, adverse childhood experiences, increased trauma responsive, massive healthcare costs, loss of productive years, loss of economic productivity, loss of community safety, but loss of community connection, and a little bit of a sense of our humanity. MDH firmly supports evidence-based strategies to decrease firearm violence, such as safe storage. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this on behalf of the Health Department.
Thanks for your testimony. And before we get on to the next round of testifiers, we did go over by about a minute and a half, so we'll make sure we get equal time to the next round of testifiers. And I just want to say, especially for the first few testifiers, you have our condolences from our committee. We really very much appreciate you sharing the stories of Ethan, John, and Michael. And we appreciate your advocacy as well. All right, next up we have Rob Dorr, and then we have Brian Ghosh, and then the order Carl Kaufman, and then Jim Anderson. Welcome back to the committee. If you want to introduce yourself and begin your testimony.
Yes, thank you. Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, members of the committees, I'm Rob Dorr. I am the Vice President of the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus. First, I want to express appreciation in the effort that's taken to update this bill since its previous iteration. It's addressed a lot of the constitutional concerns, and we all share a common goal in making sure that children don't get injured by firearms, that they're not accessible to people who shouldn't have them and people who aren't authorized to have them. I think we all share those goals. Despite these improvements, the bill before us today, it still raises a few concerns. One is the strict liability that it imposes on a firearm, regardless of whether or not a child or a prohibited person is likely to have access to it. So just the mere act of storing an unloaded firearm inappropriately can land somebody with a 30-day, up to 30 days in jail with a misdemeanor charge. If a firearm is loaded and stored improperly, again, regardless of whether a child or prohibited access is within miles of it, a person can end up in jail for 1 year. I think that while the government does have a specific interest in protecting children and unauthorized persons from having access to firearms, I don't think the bill is narrowly tailored to address those concerns with that kind of a strict liability approach. And along those lines, if we imagine there's a farmer in Aiken who for 60 years has kept a firearm in his entryway, loaded or unloaded, to fend off his wildlife from predators, doesn't have a kid in the house, he lives alone, doesn't have anybody else visiting. That's the way that he's just lived and protected his livestock for years. That's a very different approach to what would be a negligent approach for a daycare operator in Apple Valley. Clearly, that would be something that would require action. Moreover, the bill doesn't have any educational components. So that same farmer that I was talking about would immediately face a criminal penalty without any knowledge, because I'm certain he's probably not watching this hearing today, without any educational campaign, without any notification of these are the new laws that are going into effect, to make sure that they have fair notice of change in behavior for a law that they've been currently following, which again, current law states that you cannot store a loaded firearm where a child can access it. And that's a gross misdemeanor crime. He's been following that law, but the shift of the law would be unannounced to him. Going to the text of the bill, firearm storage unit on lines 2.1 to 2.3. This may just be a tweak that states that it's a container. There are some people, some collectors who actually have closets with very secure doors, or even entire rooms with I'm talking like bank vault doors that may not be included in containers. So some clarification in that might be appropriate. Going down to lines 213 and 214. Concerned that it says owns or possesses. And I'm not sure if it's the author's intent to include an owner of a firearm who has maybe loaned a firearm out to somebody in compliance with our transferee requirements in Minnesota, if they would somehow face some sort of a liability for the storage that the person borrowing the firearm would receive. Going on to 215, the updated language as amended says direct physical control or reach. This poses some concerns for I'm thinking of sports shooting competitions. And while specifically the Minnesota State High School League is excluded in this, other sports shooting competitions aren't. So trap competition or rifle competition or people just shooting trap at a range. It's not uncommon to have a rack where you drop your firearm while you're waiting for your turn so that you're not carrying it the whole time. It's not within reach, but it's still within the direct supervision of the owner or the possessor. So I think there could be some opportunity for improvement along those lines. Going to 219, again, we're looking at the first violation is a misdemeanor for an unloaded firearm, and then on 220, a gross misdemeanor if it is. Again, I think where the focus needs to be is what risk are the people posing? Are there children in the home who shouldn't have access? Are there prohibited people in the home? Right now, we're saying just merely if you leave a door open on your gun safe inadvertently, even though there's no kids in the home, that's potentially a criminal charge. The amended version appears prior, the original version down on 231 and 232 stated that unlawful entry to a firearm was an exemption, and it appears that the author's amendment removes that. I'm not sure if that's intended or something that was missed with the updated language, but the exemptions now being the 4 that are listed seem to indicate that the owner of a firearm or the possessor of a firearm would be held liable for the criminal theft of their firearm. And we'd like to make sure that that's not the case, because that's definitely outside of the person's control if they've taken the reasonable steps within the law to secure their firearm. Finally, just a few things. It does exempt a motor vehicle that is occupied by a person who owns or possesses a firearm while they're engaged in hunting. But what if the firearm isn't occupied? I know at my deer stand, I literally drive right up to my deer stand. In my trunk, I have a firearm that is transported in full compliance with Minnesota's hunting regulations, but it's not occupied anymore. It's still under my supervision. I'm right there looking at it, but that conceivably could yield a crime. I addressed the other shooting sports issues. And then again, just some additional comfort language that would address that a firearm being carried under Minnesota's permit to carry law, 624-714, that would be exempt from this if it's on or about the persons that would conceivably be held within the direct physical control, but that would offer a little bit of comfort to make sure that people who are lawfully carrying are not going to be ensnared under a safe storage issue. And then also considerations of immediate self-defense. If there is an immediate need, that if whether it's I envision a scenario. Representative Grossel's from Beltrami County. I went to college up there, and one of my friends who's a deputy says that at 90 miles an hour, he could be 30, 40, 50 minutes away from a call. And there might be a scenario where a child might need to acquire access, again, through authorization, in order for immediate self-defense. So it's just some sort of consideration for those unlikely but foreseeable issues would be appreciated. And I welcome any of the committee's questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Brian Ghosh and then Carl Kaufman. Welcome. Please introduce yourself and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, Public Safety and Children and Families Committees, and all the members. My name is Brian Gosh. I'm a lawyer and registered lobbyist with the National Rifle Association of America. House File 4300 is a well-intentioned bill, but it misses the mark. It only picks on guns. It doesn't seek to require secure knives, hammers, vehicles, or other items that can be used to hurt people. House File 4300 only targets firearms, which tends to show its true intent. Mandatory storage laws aren't about restricting unauthorized child access to firearms. These laws target benign conduct and are about stigmatizing and encumbering law-abiding gun owners and placing restrictions on how responsible parents can introduce their children to firearms and the shooting sports. As with all gun control, the overreaching goal is to discourage gun ownership and eventually eliminate it. If you take a look at subdivision 2AC of the bill, this makes a law-abiding gun owner a felon if a minor or prohibited person accesses a so-called unsecured firearm. Under current law in Minnesota statute 624.713 subdivision 1-1, minors are already prohibited from possessing a pistol, ammunition, or semi-automatic military-style assault weapon or any firearm if such minor had committed a crime of violence. Pursuant to Minnesota statute 609.66 subdivision 1B, it is a felony for a person to furnish firearms or ammunition in a municipality to a minor without the consent of the parent, guardian, or local police. Similar provisions already exist in federal law as well. 18 U.S.C. section 922X2 prohibits the possession of a handgun or handgun ammunition by any person under the age of 18 with some exceptions. Moreover, under Minnesota statute 609.666 subdivision 2, a person is already guilty of a gross misdemeanor who negligently stores or leaves a loaded firearm in a location where the person knows or reasonably should know that a child is likely to gain access. Also, under current law, Minnesota statute 609.378 subdivision 1C, a person who intentionally or recklessly causes a child under 14 years of age to be placed in a situation likely to substantially harm the child's physical health or cause the child's health as a result of the child's access to a loaded firearm is guilty of a child endangerment and may be sentenced to imprisonment for not more than 364 days or a payment of a fine of not more than $3,000 or both. And if the endangerment results in substantial harm to the child's physical health, the person may not be sentenced to, or may be sentenced to imprisonment for not more than 5 years, or to a payment of a fine not more than $10,000 or both. Also under current Minnesota law, statute 624.7162 subdivision 2, firearm stores have to provide a notice that it's unlawful to store or leave a loaded firearm where a child can obtain access. Finally, when it comes to minors, under current Minnesota law, statute 260B.425 subdivision 1A, it says any person who by act, word, or omission encourages, causes, or contributes to the delinquency of a child or to a child's status as a juvenile petty offender is guilty of a gross misdemeanor. So now, aside from the minors, the bill also talked about the prohibited persons, so these adults, and as far as that goes, federal and state law already make it illegal for a prohibited person to possess a firearm. You can see 18 U.S.C. section 922G and D. D makes it illegal to sell or otherwise dispose of firearms or ammunition to prohibited persons. Similar provisions already exist in law in Minnesota at 624.7131 subpart 10. So given the diversity of both federal and state law already on the books addressing the reckless behavior with firearms and who may possess a firearm, there is no need for House File 4300. When storing a firearm, many factors must be considered. Where and how to store those guns. A person's particular situation will be a major part of the consideration. Dozens of gun storage devices that attach directly to the gun are currently available. There are ways to further encourage responsible firearm storage that don't implicate the rights of law-abiding gun owners. The NRA has educated generations of gun owners on proper firearm storage. Moreover, tax breaks for firearm storage equipment could incentivize responsible behavior. Such bills have passed in other states. Finally, subdivision 2AD of the bill makes it an even higher felony if the firearm is used in a felony crime of violence. Imagine if this bill applied to safe storage of vehicles and you left your car running while you quickly ran into the store to pick up one item. If a minor or prohibited person stole your vehicle and used it to run someone over, you, as the owner of the vehicle, would also go to jail for the crime committed by someone else simply because of how you stored your vehicle in that hypothetical. Again, I think it demonstrates how House File 4300 is just singling out firearms. Thank you.
Thanks for your testimony. Next up is Carl Kaufman and then Jim Anderson. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and begin.
Thank you very much. My name is Carl Kaufman, and I have 3 props. I have 2 trigger locks, and these are my car keys. As I said, my name is Carl Kaufman. I am a father, a grandfather of 4 beautiful daughters. I'm a board member of the Wilmer Rifle Pistol Club. We have over 500 members and growing. I'm a youth hunter safety instructor, certified by the DNR, a certified range safety officer. I have had a concealed carry permit for over 20 years, 25, I'm working on 25. I'm a lifetime member of the NRA for 40 years. Guns are part of my life. I'd like to oppose this gun storage bill today. The bill is redundant because we already have laws, as Mr. Gash has already spoken about. The storage chapter, 609666, dates back to 1996. So I encourage people to talk about that. Now, I have brought two different types of trigger locks here, and I'd like you to think about what a criminal can do to these, first off. They can cut this, they can drill this. It's not going to stop a trigger lock on a gun, and I just want to make that point. I'd like to now give you a scenario to visualize today. I'm sleeping at home, my upstairs bedroom. I hear glass being broken. I call 911. I'm scared. The sheriff is 10 miles away. That's the closest. It'll be a while before those deputies come to my house. I've got to defend my family. I have a trigger lock on my pistol, and it's in the safe. I have a combination safe. It's in my bedroom. How do I address it? How do I protect my family? This is a slight example of what can happen in Minnesota. We have over 40 gun laws right now. We need to enforce our gun laws. We need judiciary to address the violations. All guns today are sold with trigger locks. Every box has a trigger lock in it when you buy a firearm.
And sir, I'm going to just interrupt you because we're like almost at the total time, and I know they have another person on their list, so I'd like to make sure that we have a chance to hear from them too.
Thank you. I apologize.
Yep, that's right. Thanks for your testimony. And then we have Jim Anderson. All right, welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and begin.
Thank you. My name is Jim Anderson, and I'm here to oppose the bill. I just want to reiterate some statistics that I have also. In a study done back in 2021, a survey of American gun owners was conducted commissioned by Georgetown University economist William Smith. In there, he found that about 1.7 million times a year, firearms are used for self-defense. And of that, 25%, or about 425,000, occur in the gun owner's home. So again, access is critical. When you have a break-in, as Mr. Kaufman mentioned, you don't have a lot of time. Seconds count. Police or sheriff are minutes away. Not to disparage any of the police officers or sheriffs, it's just a fact of life, where we live. So you need access immediately. If I have to spend extra seconds unlocking a gun or getting to it, or getting ammunition into it, charging the gun, I need those seconds. Within reach and being able to have a loaded gun, that's great. In my case, I don't keep them within reach. I keep them in a closet where I have access to it. It's about 10 feet away. But I still need those seconds, not having to unlock anything. So I'm asking that you are saying that you don't have a right to restrict my ability or my right to defend myself in my own home. Secondarily, we talked about it, little kids getting at guns. And my heart goes out to the people that have lost loved ones, lost children due to those atrocities. But I think it's an educational problem. It's an educational problem for adults and children. The NRA had an Eddie Eagle program which educated small children that said, stop, go tell an adult, don't touch the gun, okay? We need to teach that kindergarten, first grade, second grade, so that they all hear it right away. And again, in sixth grade, we should teach DNR firearm safety so kids understand how to handle guns and also be very safe with them if they are hunting with an adult. But also, they're an adult tool. It's not something that kids should have access to.
Sir, and I'm gonna stop you right there because we are over actually. I allowed a lot of leeway and went over a little bit on this. So thank you so much for your testimony.
And we thank everyone who's testified for the joint hearing. At this time, the Public Safety Committee is going to be taking official action, so we are going to be adjourning the joint hearing. I'll ask members of the Children and Families Committee to move from the table. If you're going to stay in the room, you can move to the area behind the testifiers table or elsewhere. But with that, the joint hearing is now adjourned. Thank you all. And to confirm, the Public Safety Committee is going to continue. It's going to be called to order momentarily, and so we're just going to shift around just a little bit.
No, I was looking for the study that said hammers are disproportionately killing our young people. I could not find.
Do we have to gavel in, Madam Chair? Can I just make my motion?
Yeah, we have to gavel in.
Okay.
I'll just go ahead and do that. I call this meeting of the Committee on Public Safety, Finance, and Policy to order. We do have a quorum. We do have to approve the minutes first. This feels really weird to do it at this point. Representative Hollins, would you move approval of the February 22nd, 2024 meeting minutes?
Yes, so moved, Madam Chair.
Any discussion of the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion prevails, and the minutes for February 22, 2024 are approved. Chair Becker-Finn, would you like to move your bill that House File 4300 be referred to the Committee on Ways and Means?
That is my motion, and then I will also move the A4 amendment to get the bill in the shape I would like.
All right, please explain the A4 amendment.
Well, when I described the overall bill, I was describing the bill as if it had been amended, but now that we're officially in Public Safety Committee, it includes some exceptions and clarifications.
Any discussion to the A4 amendment? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of the A4 amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion prevails and the A4 amendment is adopted. Next, we'll move to the DE1 amendment. Who will be offering the DE1? Representative Engen.
Thank you, Chair Moeller. And thank you, Representative Becker-Finn. So the DE1 amendment replaces the language of the bill with the addition of a prohibited person accessing a firearm to the negligent storage of firearms statute. It maintains the goal that we all share, and you said it best, saving lives. We want to make sure that kids don't have access to firearms due to negligent storage. But it also makes sure that we extend that same negligent storage statute to persons that are prohibited from accessing firearms in the first place, whether it be criminals. We heard horrific, absolutely tragic testimony from Hillary, I believe, who was talking about Michael, sharing a story where that would exactly apply. So yeah, I think that this does maintain that goal of saving lives, and I ask for your support and request a roll call as well.
A roll call has been requested. Chair Becker-Finn to the amendment.
First, I just want to correct the record. It's Beltrami County. I've told our caucus this multiple times, but it's Beltrami County. I was born there. What I do appreciate is that there is finally some acknowledgement that gun owners do have a responsibility to keep their guns stored safely, not just from children, but from other people who are unauthorized to access them. So I appreciate that about the amendment. However, what I've learned in the years that I've been working on this issue is that there is more that's needed to lay out what we mean when we say reasonable and to add those definitions. And so I would ask members to oppose the amendment, but if there are members of the minority who are open to discussing actually in good faith working on safe storage legislation, I am happy to talk about, if there are tweaks we can make. Some of the things that Mr. Doerr suggested I'm open to, and I think I've always been open to. I've just in the past failed to have folks willing to actually come to the table to work on that. So I would ask that members oppose the amendment, but I'm certainly welcome any support of moving this issue forward.
Further member discussion? All right, and before I call on you, Representative Novotny, too, just a point of clarification for what the bill does. Without the DE1 amendment, the bill already, it's my understanding, would cover unauthorized access or access by someone who's an unauthorized user. The way I'm reading the bill, everybody has to store their gun in these secure manner, and if they violate it and it is then used by somebody who's unauthorized, there are penalties for that as well. Is that correct?
That's correct, Madam Chair. We want you to store your gun safely whenever you're not using it.
Thank you. Representative Novotny.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, recognition from the testifier that this side of the table has finally come around to having concerns about safe storage of firearms. I'll go back into all the testimonies we've had on these previous bills and to say that we're just coming around to wanting to have restricted access and safe storage of firearms within the law, I think is a terrible mischaracterization. I know many of our members on this side have been firearms instructors. I've handed out personally hundreds of gun locks. To say that we're just coming around to safe, if we could get away from that divisive talk, we want kids to be safe. I've been on suicides involving guns, involving children. Please don't do that to such a sensitive issue. Thank you.
Chair Becker-Finn.
And if I could clarify, in the years that I've worked on this issue, and I'm also a former certified firearm safety instructor, I've never had an amendment that isn't just trying to completely gut and take away what we're trying to do. The amendments that's always come forward have been not aimed at making the law stronger, I guess is what I should say. So to clarify, I'm not saying that we don't care about safe storage, that anybody, I mean, nobody wants there to be gun violence, that's clear. But to clarify, this is the first time that I've seen an amendment to any of my bills that is in the direction of expanding the statute as it currently stands.
All right. Representative Inken, final comments on your amendment.
I appreciate the comments. We do want to strike that proper balance. That's super important. The way that I currently see the bill without this DE1 is it takes a sledgehammer instead of a scalpel. We don't want people overnight to be in violation of statute because A, they don't even know that it exists, but B, it's too heavy-handed. So I'd really appreciate further discussions, but ask again for support of my amendment.
All right, a roll call has been requested. The clerk will take the roll on the amendment.
Chair Mueller.
No.
Chair Mueller votes no. Vice Chair Feist.
No.
Vice Chair Feist votes no. Lead Novotny. Lead Novotny votes aye. Representative Becker-Finn.
No.
Representative Becker-Finn votes no. Representative Curran.
No.
Representative Curran votes no. Representative Engen.
Aye.
Representative Engen votes aye. Representative Frazier.
No.
Representative Frazier votes no. Representative Grossel.
Aye.
Representative Grossel votes aye. Representative Hollins.
No.
Representative Hollins votes no. Representative Hudson.
Aye.
Representative Hudson votes aye. Representative Hewitt.
No.
Representative Hewitt votes no. Representative Mueller.
Mueller votes yes.
Representative Mueller votes yes. Representative Pinto.
No.
Representative Pinto votes no. Representative Whitty.
Aye.
Representative Whitty votes aye.
6 ayes, 8 nays.
There being 6 ayes and 8 nays, the motion does not prevail. There are no other amendments filed on the bill, so now we will move to member discussion. So who wants, Representative Hudson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I go back to the heartbreaking, tragic testimony we heard from Ms. Brazel regarding the murder of her husband in front of his own home by a group of organized juvenile criminals with records. And the point that we're going to focus on is that the gun that was used in that crime was stolen from a family member who was negligently storing it. That's all we're going to do. Now, this law, this bill, if it is signed into law, if enacted prior to that crime would have done absolutely nothing. Nothing at all to prevent that from happening. What it might have done after the fact is provided an opportunity for a prosecutor to charge the family member whose gun was stolen, the victim of a theft, charge them with a felony. Could have done that. But I suppose it would have depended upon whether or not the prosecutor in question thought that prosecuting such an individual might have a negative impact upon their disparity statistics. I guess we'll never know. But one thing we do know is that if those criminals were off the street, that murder would not have occurred. That's where our focus should be in this committee, in dealing with the people who perpetrate crime and getting them out of society so that we no longer have to endanger our loved ones, rather than making it, as has been stated by our witnesses, an encumbrance to own a firearm for the purposes of self-defense. It would be more difficult for someone facing the situation that resulted in that death to respond in their own defense under this bill. It would make it worse for the victim in that case. That is why it should be opposed. Thank you.
Further member discussion? Representative Hewitt.
Thank you, Chair, and Chair Becker-Finn, thank you so much for looking at the high school league's trap situation. Hopefully it sounds like you're open to maybe some other stuff. And I guess it's kind of interesting to have this discussion. Someone compared this to storing automatic defibrillators. We actually put more money and more energy into storing automatic defibrillators in churches and places like that. And I don't know how many people, we die from heart attacks at home, how many people actually own an automatic defibrillator. So, I mean, very similar par here is that we want to protect everybody. Well, maybe everybody should have an automatic defibrillator too. So I really think this is a good start, and I appreciate it, and thanks again for working on the trap situation.
All right, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, a question for the bill's author, and then a comment. And my question for Representative Becker-Finn is, with your expertise with firearms, my understanding is that essentially what's contained in this bill is what is best practice in terms of instruction for firearms owners. And if you could just talk a little more on that point.
Chair Becker-Finn.
Actually, and thank you for the question. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think what's in the bill is actually less than what's typically taught in a firearm safety class, typically, and that was the House File 396, which is a separate bill. That was why that focused on storing. The best advice for the public who's here and listening is that you store your firearm unloaded and separate from the ammunition. Yes, it's redundant. Everything we do with firearms is redundant. You always know where it's loaded. You know whether it's loaded. You always know where it's pointed. You know what's behind what you're pointing at. All of those things are redundancies because firearms are a big deal because they can kill people. This is actually less than what you would be taught if you took a firearm safety class, which I recommend you do.
Chair Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chair Becker-Finn. And just a comment, Representative Hudson, his comments focused on the one on Ms. Brazel and her experience, and I am so grateful to her and to other testifiers for sharing their experience. I heard her calling for this bill, among other things, and we know, as was testified by, spoken to by another testifier, that any one approach is not going to solve every problem, and we know that we, in our committee, are looking at multiple approaches, right? I will say, though, when you say that this would have done nothing, we heard from Mr. Schlegelmilch. We heard from Ms. Song talking about their experience and saying that, getting these people off the streets. I don't know when somebody is using a gun against themselves, when there are kids playing and showing one another guns, is there some particular bad actor in that situation? What that is that's a case where if those firearms are stored securely, then that, in fact, gets in the way of those deaths, and we have those people with us. I heard testifiers talking about the length of time where there could be a police response, and my understanding is that firearms owners absolutely can secure their firearms in a way so they can have them quickly at the ready. I will note, though, that if a family member uses a gun to shoot themselves, if there's an accidental shooting, it's going to take an ambulance just as long to travel to one's home as it would take police to respond. And in that length of time, boy, it'd be sure better if it was not a gun that was used on somebody for themselves. And I guess, and then one other point made by a testifier was talking about if your car is stolen and the car is used to drive somebody, to hit somebody else, that you could be held liable for that, or imagine being held liable for that in the same way as under this bill. Cars have car keys. Right? Cars are, in fact, secure. Now, we know, of course, that there are ways to get past that. But the fact is that we have done a lot in our society to make sure that driving and cars are a lot safer. We heard that in the testimony from Dr. Mannix, talking about how, in fact, deaths from cars have, in fact, been dropping. And I think so long as we are not taking other approaches with firearms, we certainly should say that those who own them should take responsible steps consistent with what is the best practice and the training that they receive. So I'm grateful to Representative Becker-Finn for taking steps to protect all of us from the very different ways, the multiple ways that firearms can be used to harm us. And I'm grateful to you for pushing this, and thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, Representative Woody.
Thank you. Thank you for trying to make things better. I don't get the reference of the AEDs, but
Neither did I.
But we'll have a conversation about that. I've been on those scenes, and they're complex. What we're talking about is complex, and it's difficult when you see a young person take their lives. Obviously, there's clues ahead of time, or when there's an accidental shooting. Those are difficult times. We're trying to sort through what is the best action. But I guess my question would be, we have storage laws on the books right now. I've heard that it's underused. So why aren't we using the laws we have right now? I appreciate the effort to try to make it stronger, and I would be willing to work with you, truly. But we got laws. We got to utilize these laws, and that, like I said, this is a very complicated issue and very emotional, because I think those testifiers, because that isn't easy. And I will tell you, as a law enforcement officer for 27 years, you go to a call like in St. Paul, and you're frustrated, you're mad, and you're trying to search out what is the best thing. But sometimes the shotgun approach isn't always the best. We really should figure out why we're not using our laws right now. Thank you.
Chair Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would say right now, the law as it is, one is only a gross misdemeanor. And so I don't know if folks understand about charging decisions, but those actually aren't always county attorneys or, different people make different decisions. It's also working with law enforcement and what gets forwarded to an office for potential charging. Ideally what we're doing with laws is trying to get people to change their behaviors. And what we know is that some people are not storing their firearms safely. And under the current statute, a lot of things are not defined. We kind of rely on just kind of general reasonableness language. And so honestly, the bulk of the bill is defining things so we can be clear about what is reasonable and what is, that was part of adding the in reach to make it clear that if it's within your reach, that's fine. But I think the current statute isn't as strong as it could be. And I think a lot of times prosecutors rely on those definitions to know whether the behavior was within the statute of reasonableness or not.
And we have two more members, and then we need to move on because we do have another bill, and Judiciary is meeting again in not too long. So Representative Grassel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Becker-Finn, I look at this bill as having the same effect as the red flag bill. It's just going to hinder law-abiding citizens. It's not going to do a thing to stop suicide. The CDC put out its statistics where in place of where red flag bills were put in place, suicide rates continue to increase. They just used other means. So saying the safe storage is going to curb suicide rates, I'm sorry, but it's going to have the same non-effect as a red flag. And to say that these bills that you have coming forward are not part of an agenda, they are. The red flag is part of that. This is part of that. You just mentioned judiciary where religious rights are being infringed upon now, so.
Representative Brassel, that's not before this committee right now.
No,
We
it's
also
not.
do not impugn motives. So please, to this bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, when the author says that they're not doing this, but clearly are, can I say that? So I'll leave it at that.
Representative Navani.
Chair, Representative Becker-Finn, on line 2.1, you've got the language for tamper-proof. And that gets to the meat of the objections that we have to the bill. People wonder why we object. It's the other thing that you said just a little bit ago, based on the different attorneys' offices have different standards and different things that they're charging people out for. So my question to you is, who decides what's tamper-proof? That's a subjective thing, and we've seen that what's tamper-proof in Beltrami County, did I say it right?
Mm-hmm.
Is maybe not the same as what's tamper-proof in the largest populated county in this state. So my question, if you could just explain what tamper-proof is, and then I'll have a follow-up on that.
Chair Becker-Finn.
Tamper-proof is not defined in the bill, and I want to clarify. What I meant was people don't always realize that city attorneys charge misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors, and county attorneys charge felonies. So, and law enforcement determines when things are forwarded for charging. That was what I was trying. I wasn't saying that some counties aren't doing what they're supposed to do. I'm just saying that, like, there's a process, and people sometimes blame charging decisions that are made by city attorneys on county attorneys, and there's, you know this, but the public doesn't. So I just want to clarify that. You know, as far as the definition, I was taking notes. As you guys know, I say this all the time. I believe in the committee process. It helps make laws better. I was taking notes while Mr. Dorr was testifying. We can certainly tweak that definition if we think that's needed. You know, under generally, if a thing isn't defined, we take, you know, there are ways that we decide. But I mean, tamper-proof means it can't be tampered with. You know, if you want to define that, we certainly could. And I literally have written right here under by 2.3, look at tweaking definition here. So I'm open to that if folks have ideas.
Lead Novotny.
Chair Mueller, Representative Becker-Finn, and I ask that because ask the law enforcement officers that are in the room, and I see there's several in the crowd. I would suspect that a vault door on a heavy-duty safe, most people would be considered tamper-proof. But if you've got the proper tools, they'll cut through it like knives. The safe for an ATM, I've seen the locks cut off like butter if you've got the proper things. And you know, one particular case I responded to, as we said, I was the closest car and I was about 15 minutes away. That building was broke into, the locks were cut off, and all the money taken within 15 minutes. And it was probably shorter than that. And I ask, because what's tamper-proof? Is a locker in a locker room tamper-proof?
And I think Representative Novotny, I think she's talked about her willingness to meet the definition. So if you want to just wrap up so that we can move on to the next bill, please.
And
Chair Becker-Finn.
Just real quickly, I want to point out that it says designed to hold a firearm is in the bill language.
Thank you, Chair Becker-Finn. Lead Novotny.
Okay, so we're going to have real issues when it comes to storage of equipment in locker rooms in police departments. And I mean, not to be glib about this, but what if my house identifies as tamper-proof? I retract the question, but I think the point's made. Sure, thank you.
All right, and I will turn it over to final comments, and I'm sure you can address that in your final comments. Chair
Yeah,
Becker-Finn.
thank you, Madam Chair. And like I said, I'm glad to hear that folks are open to making this a better bill without just trying to kill the bill. I think this is really important. yes, the point we're going to focus on today is the guns, but we had record levels of funding sent out to law enforcement last session, and we'll address those in further hearings. Finally, one more thing. Paid lobbyists don't get to tell me what my intent is. If you're talking about why a member of the committee is doing a thing, that's talking about motives, and only the author of the bill gets to speak to why they are doing a thing. Nobody's paying me. Nobody asked me to do this. I decided to do this because I've been a firearm safety instructor. I have owned guns my entire life, and I'm sick of reading stories about kids dying from being shot. That's why I'm doing this. There's no agenda. There's no ulterior motive. Not trying to take your guns. My gun safe is full, so I don't want your guns. I think it's fine if you own guns. No, I'm not trying to take your guns. That's not what is happening here. So anyone pushing that agenda, some paid lobbyists doing that, it's just false. It's just false. So we need to stop saying false things about the bills in front of us. These aren't accidents. I always put accidents when I talk about firearm deaths of children in quotes because they're not accidents. Because at the end of the day, behind every child who is harmed by a gun is an adult who didn't store that gun or handle it safely. Kids aren't going into Joe's Sporting Goods and buying guns. Somebody bought that gun, and then somewhere between that and it getting in the hands of a child, an adult didn't do the safe thing. So the bill in front of us is laying out ways that adults can be safer so that kids and others are not harmed. That's the goal. I want people to not be dying from gun violence, and it's been a good discussion. Thank you, Madam Chair, and would ask for member support.
Chair Becker-Finn renews the motion that House File 4300 as amended be re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The motion prevails. All right, we're going to try to move through this next one quickly. House File 601, it's a Representative Herr bill. This was a bill that we heard last year. I will move that House File 601 be re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. Although we did hear the bill last year and we did take testimony at that time, we did allow for written testimony, so please be sure to check that in your packets and online. Chair Herr, I believe that you have an author's amendment A3, and it's my understanding it just updates the effective date. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chair Moeller.
I will move the A3 amendment. All those in favor of the A3 amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion prevails. Next, we'll move to the A4 amendment. Who's offering the A4 amendment? Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Herr, for considering the A4 amendment. Consistent with the theme today, it very much feels as though we're criminalizing victims with these bills. And I just want to try to curtail that a little bit with this amendment. So in line 110 of your bill, it makes reference to reporting within 48 hours of the time the person knew or reasonably should have known of the loss or theft. My concern is that we're going to get a little too cute by half in our interpretations of what is considered reasonable. And so what my amendment would do is replace the word reasonably with by clear and convincing evidence. Let's make sure that we can demonstrate that the person was in fact negligent in their failure to report their gun missing. I would ask for your support and a roll call vote, please.
All right, Representative Herr to the amendment.
Thank you, Chair Moeller, and thank you, Representative Hudson, for bringing this amendment forward. I would ask for the committee to vote no. I'd like to just state that the state already has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the owner knew or should have known. Furthermore, 3 states have this same standard: Arizona, California, and Kentucky. And I would also state that in Minnesota criminal statute right now, that reasonably know or variation of that shows up in 5 other places. I think just the last final point is that actually in the Republican DE, there actually included language reasonably should have known in that particular DE. And so since you all agreed that that was reasonable in that amendment from your side, I would hope that you all will vote this down as well. So I would ask for a no vote on this amendment.
Further discussion to the amendment. Representative Pinto?
I'll just say, Madam Chair, I feel like this is mixing up, there's a reasonable standard for somebody's behavior, and I think this is bringing in a standard of decision of clear and convincing evidence, say probable cause, clear and convincing evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. So I don't think I think this is sort of mixing up kind of apples and oranges. The way that the bill is originally written makes great sense to me as a prosecutor, and I'm not quite sure how this would even work. So I would urge a no vote as well. Thanks.
Final comments on the amendment, Representative Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members, for your feedback on the amendment. I would say the specifics of what it is that we're talking about, which is establishing the knowledge that a person had, and more than that, when we think they reasonably should have had knowledge that we're not sure whether or not they actually did. These things are so ambiguous that I don't think the reasonable standard in this particular case is quite precise enough, and I would urge support of the amendment. Thank you.
All right, a roll call has been requested. The clerk will take the roll.
Chair Mueller.
No.
Chair Mueller votes no. Vice Chair Feist.
No.
Vice Chair Feist votes no. Lead Novotny. Lead Novotny votes aye. Representative Becker-Finn.
No.
Representative Becker-Finn votes no. Representative Curran.
No.
Representative Curran votes no. Representative Engen. Aye. Representative Engen votes aye. Representative Frazier.
No.
Representative Frazier votes no. Representative Grossel.
Aye.
Representative Grossel votes aye. Representative Hollins.
No.
Representative Hollins votes no. Representative Hudson.
Aye.
Representative Hudson votes aye. Representative Hewitt.
No.
Representative Hewitt votes no. Representative Mueller.
Mueller votes yes.
Representative Mueller votes yes. Representative Pinto.
No.
Representative Pinto votes no. Representative Whitty.
Aye.
Representative Whitty votes aye.
There being 6 ayes and 8 nays, the motion does not prevail. We will move to member discussion very quickly. Do we have any member discussion? Lead Novotny.
I've got a question about the legality of the law overall for the lawyers on the other side. Haynes versus U.S. 1968 bill determined that a person cannot be held, it's a violation of the Fifth Amendment rights of self-incrimination. A prohibited person cannot be compelled to register a firearm. Therefore, prohibited persons could not be compelled to comply with any lost or stolen requirements. How do you feel about the legality of this and possible Fifth Amendment violation?
Representative Herr.
Representative Novotny, Chair Moeller, Representative Novotny. Representative Novotny, I actually do not know about that specific that you cited, but I do know that this law is actually already has passed in many states, and that it has not been challenged in those particular states. And this is actually a common sense gun law that is supported by law enforcement, and they did send letters of support last year, and also with individuals that actually instruct on firearm safety. And so, though I understand what you're asking, I would like to just point to the fact that this is actually a law that remains in many states.
Representative Novotny.
I'll have it closed before we go if there's nobody else.
Is there somebody else? I didn't see anybody else raise the hand. It's just you? It's all you?
Thank you. This goes back to our original thing that we just discussed. We're not worried, or we're not objecting to the face of the bill. We're objecting to the fine print of the bill, which is that, once again, you're subjective. We had a reasonable amendment. Make it clear that you meant for this and that you had a clear proof that you were guilty of this before you be, a standard of guilt. We've seen, and I'll repeat it again, and I'll repeat it for the rest of the session. We've got different standards in this state, and depending on where you are and what county is prosecuting it, you could be held to a much different standard in one area than you would in another. We want uniform laws. We want uniform enforcement. And if it saves one life, if we're going to go down if it saves one life, we'll go back to what Representative Hudson said, and we all agree with. If it saves one life, we could apply that to a whole bunch of other things that we offer bills and we offer amendments to that get voted down. If you're going to do the one life is worth it, then I think we need to apply it universally, not just on the laws that you pick and choose or that are suggested by a certain county attorney. I'd also like to point out, Representative Becker-Finn, that I've never accepted $1 from any political lobbyist on a gun control group either. Thank you.
Closing comments, Representative Herr.
Thank you, Chair Merlin. Thank you, committee members, for the discussion. I do just want to note that this is actually really plain language spelled out very clearly. And I know we've been talking about criminalizing victims, but I just want to point out that the first penalty is a petty misdemeanor. And under Chapter 609.02, it defines petty misdemeanor that does not constitute a crime. And so we do give people quite a bit of leeway. And then also that there is an indemnity that also allows you that if you report it, you're not held responsible for this. So the goal of this bill is actually to incent people, not to punish them. And so I do hope that the committee supports this, because this is a very reasonable solution to gun trafficking and straw purchasing, things that really actually would have helped with recent situations we've all experienced and is very close to us. And so I would hope support of this committee.
Thank you. I renew the motion that House File 601 as amended be re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The motion prevails. Members, that concludes today's agenda. Just a reminder about motives again. We don't impugn motives to our members. Just want to remind us all of that moving forward. And we will see you next Tuesday. With that, the meeting is adjourned.